In 1975, a small island was wiped off the world's conscience, and the nations that watched it happen never said a word. What you are about to hear is not a story from ancient history. The survivors are still alive. Some of them are grandmothers. Some of them are grandfathers. And the governments responsible have never faced a single day in court. This is East Timor. And if you have never heard of it, that is not an accident. East Timor sits at the eastern tip of the Indonesian archipelago, a place of mountain villages, rice terraces, and a people who had held on to their culture through 400 years of Portuguese colonial rule. By 1974, Portugal was collapsing. A revolution back in Lisbon forced Portugal to begin releasing its colonies. And for the first time in 4 centuries, the people of East Timor could see independence on the horizon. Schools were opening. Political parties were forming. A nation was being born. They were 9 days into that nation when everything changed. On December 7, 1975, Indonesian warships surrounded the coast of Dili, the capital of East Timor. Indonesian paratroopers dropped from the sky before dawn. And within hours, a military invasion that had been planned for months was underway. Indonesia called it a liberation. They said the Timorese people had asked to be integrated. They said it was about stability and security. Every single one of those claims was a lie. The Indonesian military, under the direct command of General Suharto, had been planning this invasion for months. And they had made one phone call before launching it. Not to the United Nations. Not to international law. They called Washington, D.C. On December 6, 1975, the night before the invasion, U.S. President Gerald Ford and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew out of Jakarta after a meeting with Suharto. Within 24 hours, Indonesian forces crossed the border. American-supplied weapons. American-trained soldiers. American political cover. And America said nothing. What followed was not a military operation. It was a systematic campaign to destroy a people. Indonesian forces moved from village to village across the mountainous interior of East Timor. Civilians were rounded up and placed in resettlement camps on the coast, cut off from their farmland, their food supply, their way of life. The mountains, where Timorese resistance fighters had retreated, were bombed and deforested. Supply routes were cut. Villages were emptied by force. People did not just lose their homes. They lost everything that kept them alive. By 1979, just 4 years after the invasion, famine had spread across East Timor's interior. Aid organizations that eventually gained access described scenes of mass starvation. The International Committee of the Red Cross reported that the situation was comparable to Biafra. The outside world barely noticed. Here is the number that should stop you completely: 180,000 people. That is the estimated death toll from the Indonesian occupation of East Timor between 1975 and 1999. 180,000 people, in a territory whose total population was less than 700,000. That is 1 in 4 people. 1 in every 4 people in East Timor died as a direct result of this occupation, through killing, famine, and disease caused by military strategy. Proportionally, it is one of the deadliest genocides of the 20th century. And it received a fraction of the attention of conflicts with far lower death tolls, because the country doing it was a strategic partner of the West. Indonesia was a buffer against communism in Southeast Asia. That made East Timor expendable. But the Timorese did not disappear quietly. Deep in the mountains, Fretilin resistance fighters held out for years, outgunned, outnumbered, fighting with weapons captured from Indonesian soldiers. Ordinary civilians smuggled information out of the territory at enormous personal risk. Catholic priests documented atrocities and passed reports to bishops outside the country. A network of resistance that had no air force, no navy, no international allies, and refused to stop. And then on November 12, 1991, something happened that could not be hidden. At the Santa Cruz Cemetery in Dili, a crowd of young Timorese gathered to mourn a pro-independence activist who had been killed. Indonesian soldiers opened fire on the crowd. Hundreds of unarmed civilians, many of them teenagers, were shot in a cemetery. What the Indonesian military did not know was that 2 foreign journalists had their cameras rolling. The footage was smuggled out of East Timor. It aired on television screens across the world. And for the first time, the international community could not look away. The pressure that followed was slow. It was painful, and it cost more lives before it produced results. But in 1996, Bishop Carlos Bello and José Ramos-Horta were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their work documenting and resisting the occupation. The world finally had names and faces attached to what had been done. And on August 30th, 1999, 24 years after the invasion, East Timor held a United Nations-supervised independence referendum. 78.5% of the population voted for independence. The Indonesian military and pro-Indonesian militias responded by burning Dili to the ground. Buildings were torched. The city that had survived the invasion was systematically destroyed in the weeks after the vote, a final act of collective punishment against a people who had dared to choose freedom. International peacekeepers finally arrived. The burning stopped, and on May 20th, 2002, East Timor became an independent nation, the first new country of the 21st century. But here is what justice looked like. No Indonesian general was prosecuted. No Western government that supplied weapons or political cover faced any accountability. Henry Kissinger, whose approval gave Indonesia the green light, lived until 2023, celebrated, awarded, and never charged with a single crime connected to East Timor. The UN Commission for Reception, Truth and Reconciliation concluded that Indonesian forces and their auxiliaries were responsible for the deaths of at least 102,800 people. A separate analysis puts the total excess death figure at 180,000. And the official response from Jakarta to this day is that what happened was a legitimate military operation. 180,000 people, a third of a nation, grandmothers, children, farmers, teachers, priests, people who woke up one morning in 1975 thinking their country was about to be born, and instead watched it be buried. The world knew, and the world chose business over blood. Before you scroll, drop a comment telling me which country you are watching this from. Because this story was suppressed for decades, and every single person who knows it now is someone the people of East Timor needed 20 years ago. If this shocked you, share it right now without closing this video. Because the only reason stories like East Timor stay buried is because silence is easier than discomfort. Share this. Comment on it. Let the algorithm know that the truth still matters. Because somewhere in East Timor, there is an old woman who survived all of this, and she has never once heard anyone outside her country say her people's name. Say it with your share.